Hi, y'all. Good morning. Can you hear me? Well, great. I just kind of scream nonstop. Let's go ahead, grab a seat if you're staying for our conversation, and we'll go ahead and get started. Wonderful. Great. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Well, good morning, everyone. I know, I think all of y'all. So we have for the last 2 months or so been having I think this is 11th Cathedral Reads, I think when I did the math, in that ballpark. And we have been reading Encounters with Unexpected Animals. And one of the reasons, as we went through thinking, what do we pick, why do we pick it, all that stuff, one of the things that was very, very exciting was the prospect of being able to actually talk to the author who wrote it, which I am just like tickled to death that we were able to do that. So this morning, we are wrapping up Cathedral Reads for this summer with Bret Anthony Johnston. So please welcome Bret. I know many of y'all were at our writing workshop yesterday, which was just a ton of fun. I'm going to embarrass you a little bit and read your biography in front of you. So Bret Anthony Johnston, who's here with us today, is the best-selling author of Encounters with Unexpected Animals, which we read, as well as the novels We Burn Daylight and Remember Me Like This, and the short story collection Corpus Christi. Among his many honors are a Guggenheim Fellowship and a National Endowment for the Arts Literature Fellowship. His work has been widely translated and appears in the New Yorker, the Atlantic Esquire, Paris Review, and the Virginia Quarterly Review, among others. After directing the creative writing program at Harvard University for over a decade, he is now the director of the Michener Center for Writers at the University of Texas at Austin, where he holds the Mari Sebusawa Regents Chair in Writing. So please welcome Bret again and for sharing some of his time with us this weekend.
Thank you, Bradley. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I feel so lucky that Bradley made the mistake of inviting a living author to Cathedral Reads. So I understand that after my time is done, you're going to go back to invite reading only dead writers.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
it was good while it lasted, Bradley.
Exactly. You've really set everyone up for failure after this. So. So I figured what we'll do today is we'll chat for a little bit, and then I want to open up for questions for Bret, whether you've read the book or not. So please be curious. If you will go to that microphone that's set up right there, that will make it easier for everyone here to hear, but as well as those who are watching the Dean's Hour live stream. Okay, sound good? Bret, I want to start just with a little bit about you. So can you tell us, how did you get here? How did you wind up as an author, as director of the Michener Center? What was your journey to finding this kind of vocation?
Sure. Thank you, Bradley. So I grew up in South Texas, and I always saw my parents reading. They always had a book in their hands, and they weren't reading especially sophisticated work, but they were always reading. So I grew up feeling as though reading was an important part of your daily life. And so I fell in love with reading very early. So my parents were big readers, but they were not educated by any stretch of the imagination. Neither of them had graduated high school. And so when I graduated high school, it was a foregone conclusion that I was going to go to college, which meant for us that I would go to community college. And so I continued reading. I studied literature, but I exclusively studied literature that had been written 50 or 100 years, 200 years prior. I was reading the Greeks. I was reading Faulkner and everything in between, which is to say that even though it sounds like a sad joke, I grew up not understanding that books were still being written. I grew up thinking that authors had gone extinct. I thought as someone who loves to read, our job is to read as many of the books as we can that had already been written, and that was it. And if you enjoy writing, you write your silly poems, you write your silly stories, and you put them in a drawer. And I had an amazing teacher in community college, a world literature teacher, who knew that I loved to read and who knew that I worked hard on my essays on Cervantes and, Sir Gawain and things like that. And he walked, to this day, I've told Bradley this before, but to this day, I can remember him walking across the small community college classroom and putting a ticket on my desk. And he said, "You should go to this." And because he was such a mentor for me, I would have walked into traffic for him. And I didn't know where he was sending me, but if he told me to go somewhere, I was going to go. And so I walked into an auditorium that night, handed over my ticket, as someone who loved to read and who loved to write these silly stories and poems. And an hour later, I walked out knowing that I was going to spend my life trying to be a writer. And what changed, the sea change that happened in that hour's time, is that I laid my eyes on a living, breathing writer for the first time in my life, because he had sent me to an author reading, a reading by the novelist Robert Stone. And now that I was witnessing a man reading from a book that he had written, and he was still alive, I knew that it was possible. I had no reason to believe that it was going to work out for me, but I knew myself well enough to know that if I didn't try, I was going to regret it for the rest of my life. So in many ways, to kind of cap off your question, Bradley, how did I get here? I've been very, very lucky in my career, but I've also just felt the whole time and continue to feel like I'm still trying to be a writer. I'm still trying to figure this out.
Yeah, that's lovely. What was the first piece you had published?
The first piece that I had published was a very short memoir, and it was like a 1,000-page. It was in the literary paragon that some of you may have heard of, called Glamour magazine. And I was in grad school, and we had this assignment to write a short memoir, a short essay, and I did it, and I didn't think anything more of it. I turned it into class, and then maybe 2 months later, I've completely forgotten about this thing because it just felt like an assignment. And this is in the Stone Ages. Email was sort of a thing, but everybody was still using the phone and snail mail and faxes. And so someone called me, and that was also, there was caller ID, but I guess we didn't pay for it. And so I answered the phone, and someone was saying, "Hi, I'm so-and-so from Glamour magazine. I want to publish the essay that you've written." And I hadn't submitted it. I felt certain this was one of my buddies messing with me. He had, conscripted his mother to be this person. And I think I said, okay, sure, whatever, and didn't really do anything. And then they called back and said, "Yeah, we wanted to see if we could firm this up." And I was like, "Why do you keep messing with me? What's the problem?" And so what had happened was that the instructor that I had turned that essay into, he had a relationship with Glamour magazine, and he thought it would fit well there, and he sent it there without my knowledge, and then they were harassing me.
What was that experience like to see something you wrote? In my mind, that's oh my gosh, you're now a writer. You've been published, you're out in the world. What was it like seeing this thing out in the wild for the first time?
Yeah, I think early on how it feels is it feels like you've broken through this barrier of disbelief. It feels like this thing, going back to me walking into that auditorium and thinking, I have no reason to believe this is going to work out. And then there's some kind of external evidence that it is working out. But it feels exhilarating, but it also feels disorienting, because kind of like what we were talking about with George in the workshop yesterday. Once something is published, it it no longer belongs to the writer. It really, really doesn't. And I think that can sound kind of metaphorical, and it might sound kind of hyperbolic, but it's actually a feeling of severance. You feel like, okay, this was something that I spent years of my life on, and I'm happy that it's out there, but the person who's kind enough to read it, they have far more ownership of it and probably understand it far better than the person who created it.
That's lovely. So you had your first memoir, expensive memoir. You've written short stories. You've written novels. We kicked off Cathedral Reads with Antonia Nelson doing a little Zoom lecture for us, which was so helpful because she kind of parsed novel and short story. And one of the things she said that's kind of stuck with me is short story isn't like on the way to being a novel. Like, it's not like, oh, this is just kind of, this is where you start, but eventually you grow up as a writer, and then you do a real thing, which is a novel. And so as someone who has done both, could you reflect a little bit on what kinds of stories do you gravitate towards for a short story? What do you gravitate towards for a novel? How do you think about the differences between those kinds of narratives?
Sure, yeah, and Toni Nelson is an amazing writer, instructor, literary citizen, and she's both an amazing novelist and a short story writer, so I'm glad that y'all were able to spend time with her. I think it comes down to, it's intuitive. It's not necessarily something that you plan, but it's when you're thinking about this idea that you have, or this scrap of dialogue you've overheard, or whatever it is that is the origin of your curiosity, what you're doing is you're gauging, can I keep this idea in my head in a kind of discrete form? And if that's the case, then it's probably going to be a story. Mm-hmm. And if it feels like I can only think about one part of it at a time, and then I start thinking about another part of it, it probably means that it's going to be a novel, because the reader is only going to be able to think about it in those terms as well. The other thing that I would say, and it's, I'm guessing some of you have encountered this, but short stories would seem to be tailor-made for this moment in our culture, right? Where our attention spans are they're just so small, and they're shrinking day by day. We have so many things vying for our attention that it would seem as though a shorter story would be exactly what we gravitate toward. But the reality is that we read stories in a vastly different way than we read novels. Mm-hmm. Reading a novel is a very passive experience, right? Because you're reading it, and you'll read, 10, 20, 100 pages, and you'll put the book down, you'll go to sleep, you'll go to work, you'll do whatever, and then you'll come back to it, and you'll be able to pick up where you left off. It's a very passive experience. For a short story, it's a far more active experience. Like, often you have to read a short story 2-3 times to really, really understand what it's doing on the page. And it's very active. You're very engaged in it. And so the reality is that stories are not very popular because they ask more of the reader than a novel does. And my kind of belief is that the only thing that asks more of a reader than a short story is poetry. And you can see that poetry, to our great detriment, is not as popular as it once was. And I think it's because it's a far more, again, active experience, and we just don't have we haven't been conditioned to give ourselves that completely to something that is shorter but far more, asks so much more of us.
That's lovely. I'm glad you said it, because even reading, it's funny, we picked this book of short stories, and then a little book club I'm in, unrelated to this, also selected short stories for like our monthly reading or whatever. And that experience of like expecting more, like we read novels normally for, Cathedral Reads, but also our book club. Then we went to short stories. And that experience of like having to work a little bit more or kind of sit with a level of frustration that like, oh, this isn't, not everything is being spelled out for me. Even there was the story in this collection that I think about that is Dixon, where at the end of that story, I was like, I simply must know everything else that happens. No, I want to wait, what's going on? I want to know all these characters. And it is it's a delightful frustration. It's a delightful frustration that you're given this little window into these like fully fleshed lives. And then it just goes away with that experience. That, oh, I have to work a little bit more to imagine some stuff around this narrative. I've got to do a little bit more work about piecing some stuff together that's not just going to be explained to me. It was, and I don't know the last time I've read something that felt like that. Like, oh, it's not just about hurry up and wait because it'll be told to you. You actually have to end the story and say, oh, I have to sit with this. I actually have to sit with this and think about it. Yeah. I actually have to sit with this and dwell on it. And I thought,
also, I mean, most people just think it's frustrating.
Yeah.
And they don't think of it as delightful or beautiful or any of the kind things that you said. They just think it's frustrating. Novels or, anything that allows them just to have it. And there's nothing wrong with novels at all. This is not hierarchical, but it allows the narrative just to wash over the reader as opposed to the reader trying to swim against the current.
Yeah. Well, and it seems to me that like, and I suppose this is true, good short story writer, good novelist, but as a reader reading a short story, I feel like I've really got to sit with every word, every sentence. When there have been novels where I'm like, I can just kind of glance at this page. Like, it'll figure it out, But there's a real, it's like, okay, if someone is only going to spend 10 or 20 pages to tell me a story, I've got to trust at some point that every word could carry something. Yeah. And so that does require just a different kind of engagement as a reader.
And as a writer, because you're feeling, if you're someone who takes the form seriously, you maybe you could get away in a short story. Maybe you could get away with a couple of wrong words. Maybe if it's a really, really great story, you can get away with a few bad sentences. But once we get to the point of you have a bad paragraph in a short story, we're dead in the water, And so as a writer, it's like, well, do I really want to do that to myself,
Yeah. Okay, so talking about encounters with unexpected animals, how did this come together? Like because I think the earliest piece published was 2012, right? I think.
Yes.
That sounds right. That sounds
Sure.
right to me. Great. Do you write with a sense of, okay, I'm going to tell stories that could come together, or is it kind of like a happy accident? Like you look back and say, oh my gosh, I've written all these things that when brought together have a through line or have some touch points. What's the process of gathering a short story collection like this?
Sure. So I'm a writer that I'm always working on more than one thing at a time. If I were only writing a short story, or I were only writing a novel, that would feel to me as though I've got all of my eggs in one basket, and if that basket falls and crashes on the ground, I'm out of a job. So I'm always working on more than one thing because I find writing so incredibly, incredibly difficult. So I'll be working on a novel, and the novel will hit a brick wall, and it'll break my heart, and I'll just think, why am I doing this? I need to go get a job at Costco or something. And then I'll jump over and I'll write a story, and I'll think like, oh, okay, this is going really well. This is what I should be doing. That novel is a stupid idea. And then the story will hit a brick wall, and it'll break my heart, and I'll think, what am I doing? This is so stupid. And then I'll think, that novel wasn't so bad. And then I'll jump back over there, and I just kind of leapfrog until one of them is done. And so most of these stories were written, well, I mean, all of these stories were written while I was writing novels. And there's a number that I wrote in that time that are not in the book because, exactly as you so kindly say, they didn't quite fit with the through line, or they weren't gonna be a meaningful star in the constellation. So I left them out. But it was a little bit of a plan, and also a kind of trusting the synchronicity of following my curiosity.
Yeah, that's lovely. It was very funny when we selected this, folks asked, like, what is it? Is it about animals? And I was like, well, I mean, yes, but in some ways, like, it's about, like, the human animal, right? And it was fascinating because I think I cracked it open like, okay, this is going to be like, there's going to be a story about a parrot somewhere, and parrot. I think in the title story, parrot is used as an imagery, but reading the whole thing, setting it down, reflecting on it, the two things that were so interesting to me and that I really resonated with. The two things I noticed, given my own experience, all your stories have a male protagonist, and then there's such a through line about these men, these boys, these teens, like reaching out for connection or reconnection. It seemed that so many of these stories really sat with or dwelt on this wonder about the relationships we have, the relationships that make up our lives. The desire for connection. I mean, I felt like I kept finding a lot of, there's this kind of yearning for connection in many of these stories. And I'm curious what leads you towards those kind, and I could be wild, you can tell me I'm wrong, right? That the reader's wrong. But I'm curious what leads you to those kinds of stories where connection and kind of desire for connection come up.
I mean, I meant what I said, that I really do, I make a lot of jokes, and I hope that these conversations that we have are fun for everybody, but I'm being very honest when I say that I believe that the reader probably understands the stories better than the writer does. I really, really do believe that. And I also believe that the reader completes the story, that your interpretation of them longing for connection is what those stories need for them to have a full life. And I can't give that to them without you. Yeah. I can also say with complete confidence that I've never once thought about exactly what you said. And that means you're right as opposed to meaning that you're wrong, because what I'm thinking about is you mentioned the title story where a parrot kind of shows up. All I'm thinking about is what would it feel like to be a father who doesn't approve, for lack of a better word, of the young woman that your son is dating, and what would you do? And that's all I can think about. That's all I can think about. I can't think about what it means or how it's going to hit the reader or anything like that. I'm thinking about, okay, he's going to offer to give her a ride home. What's going to happen on that ride? Yeah. And I don't know, so as silly as it sounds, like I have to write the story to find out what happens on that ride. Yeah. So you're not writing with this is helpful, because I think as a reader, I can have this idea of like the author who's ensconced in a study and is like, this great meaning has come to me. It sounds to me that part of even your own process is you're not setting out to write something saying, well, here's what it means, or here's the meaning, or you might not even know the meaning it has for you yet. You know this image, this scene, this point that you then want to flesh out. And then I imagine you get surprised sometimes at the meaning you discover in your own writing. If a story doesn't surprise me, you will never read it. Yeah. I mean, I'm always chasing a kind of surprise. And those authors that you're imagining who are ensconced in their studies and their they think they've got this amazing idea and they're going to write this thing and they're going to, deposit it in the reader's brain. I hate all those authors. Like, I know them. I don't like them.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question, and then if folks have questions for Bret, go ahead and start lining up at the mic. One question I wanted to ask came from a participant yesterday, and I think it kind of goes with this, where I wrote it down so I wouldn't remember. So you talked about the author has to, you write it, and then the reader kind of brings the story full circle. So for you, how much work is it to trust the reader as you're writing? Like, is it easy for you to say, like, hey, what people get from it is what they get from it? Or do you have to work to kind of let your protectiveness down around the story?
It's a lovely question. I trust the reader implicitly and unconditionally. I really don't think I'm any more of an authority on the stories than the reader is. Yeah. I really, really don't, because when I see the stories, I see, it could be 6 months or 10 years of my life, and I look at them and I see all the ways that it is stitched together in the most ugly, fragile way, and I think, like, oh, there's that one little thread holding everything together. I hope nobody notices it. So I'm seeing the stories in a vastly different way. But what I will say, when it comes to the idea of how much I trust the reader, I trust the stories most when they prove me wrong.
Yeah.
That's really when I trust the stories most.
I love that. Any questions for Bret?
What do you mean prove you wrong?
That's good, yeah.
Thank you. So the question is, what do I mean when I say this? I trust the stories most when they prove me wrong. So almost everything that I've written, maybe everything that I've written, I will have a sense that, okay, this is where the story is going to go. Maybe I even have a sense of, like, this is what's going to happen. And if that is what happens, it's a failed story, because the story has not availed itself of being smarter than I am, because I could figure it all out from the beginning. But when the story says, you planned for us to go left, but we're actually going to go right, that's when I trust the story most. The story that Bradley kindly mentioned, basically that's a story where a father takes his son's girlfriend for a drive, and he says, I want you to break up with him. And when I started writing that story, I thought that maybe he's going about it in the wrong way, but that feels like he's coming from a good place. And so it's of course it's going to work. And then when it really doesn't work, that's when I trusted the story the most.
Nancy, yeah.
Hi. I identified with your thought about you were afraid there were only that many books to read in the world. Because at 7, my fear was that I would read faster than people could write, and I would run out of books. Okay.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Are you familiar with Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, where she talks about writing? No.
I'm not sure that I'm familiar with that exact text, but I know some of the things that Elizabeth Gilbert says about writing.
Yeah, that she believes the stories are out there demanding someone is going to write them. Yeah. So do you kind of agree with that? Because I found that fascinating.
Sure. What I believe sounds very kind of hokey, but it is what I believe. I believe the stories use us in order to be written. I think we're the tool that the story needs to be written. I don't think I've given it the thought that Elizabeth has in terms of where do the stories exist before they're written, but I do feel as though they're using us to be written. And I think of it as we're kind of a tool. And that's also true for the way that the writers work as well, because there's an amazing quote that is very, very meaningful for me, and it comes from a poet named Ilya Kaminsky, and he says that we use craft to surprise the question in our hearts. And I think that's what we're trying to do. With all the things that we talked about in the workshop yesterday, we're trying to use the tools that we understand to engage what we don't understand.
Yeah. That makes me think, oh, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
So she's asked, who are my readers? So this is what I'm about to say is true. I basically have three readers. I have one person that I exchange work with who's invaluable to me in a kind of macro way. Like, he will be really, really good at saying the third part of this 4-part book doesn't work. So on a macro way, he's great. He's useless at the sentence level, but he's great on the macro. And then I have another dear friend who's amazing at the sentence level, and she'll tell me, you don't need this sentence, or you need to rewrite these 20 pages or whatever. So at the micro level, she's amazing. And here's the part that, again, sounds like a joke, but is true. I have another person that I read that reads for me, and I think of, I'm going to try to mask the gender so you don't Google it, but I think of them as almost a reverse barometer, in so much as I'll give them something to read, and if they call me and say, this is the best thing I've ever read in my life, this is amazing, this is wonderful, you're going to win all the prizes, you're going to make all the money, I'm basically on the floor weeping because they are infallibly wrong. If they say that it's good, it means it's bad. Yeah. It's really, really bad. Conversely, if they call and say, like, look, we gotta have a talk, this is horrible, I'm organizing a dance party because it means that it's going to be really, really good. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Last kind of to close up our time. I'm going to ask you to get kind of philosophical. I thought about this yesterday after our time together, and even hearing some of your comments today made me think of this. I don't know that anyone in this room is like a professional writer. One of the things that made me so excited.
That's why I like everybody in this room.
One of the things that made me so excited about, like, oh, let's do a short story writing workshop when we were like, we want to do short stories. Is I think for many of us, high school, maybe college, we take the creative, like we are given permission to kind of be creative and play. And then I think as we go through adulthood, very often we stop that for whatever reason. Or you can be, if you're playing in an adult softball league, everyone's like, yeah, great. I think if people, I feel like we don't give ourselves much permission to just write and to be creative. And so I'm curious if you could just close us out by reflecting on the role of just creativity in our life as people, and for you, the role of creativity in your life. Like, why is it important that we be creative, even if it's not our profession? For the person who's drawn to writing, the being published doesn't need to be the end goal. What is it that creativity does for our life? If you could do that in 30 seconds, that'd be amazing, Brad.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, what I'll just
no, go for it. Yeah.
I'll just say that first, I've just enjoyed my time here so much. I'm so grateful for you to have me and the book, and for all of you to spend time with me. I'm really, really so grateful to you. I think what you're ultimately talking about is that creativity is often a manifestation of empathy. Mm-hmm. What we're really doing when we write is we're trying to understand what someone else feels. Mm-hmm. And we're trying to see the world through their eyes and experience it through their senses. And I think whether you're trying to be a professional writer, whether you're writing a thank you note, whether you're writing an essay for an assignment, what you're doing is so often, we learn in school that writing is a kind of self-expression, that you write something to express yourself. And I would humbly suggest that that's not true, that we don't write, we don't create, whether we're a painter, whether we're a sculptor, whether we're doing textile work with fabric. I don't think we create in order to express ourselves. I think we create in order to escape ourselves. I think we want to contribute something to a community that is larger than our single experience. And by extending yourself, by escaping yourself, by saying, I'm going to offer something to someone, a thank you note or a billion readers, what you're doing is saying, I am making an investment in this community, and your perspective is as important as mine, and I'm here to listen to it and to pay attention to it and to trust that we're going to be better together.
Yeah, that's lovely. I have 3 fun hot seat questions, and then we'll be done.
Okay.
I'm not going to ask you what authors you hate, although
There's a lot. I mean,
in
we don't
my
have
heart, I'm
time.
confused. Okay, what's a short story everyone should read?
In the Cemetery Where Al Jolson is Buried by Amy Hempel.
Okay, lovely. What's a novel everyone should read?
I saw it in the amazing bookstore. I think it's the best novel that I've read in the last 5-10 years is a novel called Northwoods by Daniel Mason. And I'm going to give you the pitch to make you because it's going to sound really, really boring, and then I'm just going to ask you to trust me. It's the story of a cabin in western Massachusetts over the course of 200 years.
Oh,
It is a breathtaking achievement, and it's weirdly riveting. Like, oh, it's a cabin in western Massachusetts. You've never been so interested in a cabin in western Massachusetts as you would be in Northwoods.
That's lovely. Okay, last question. Who's the contemporary author that really excites you, that you would commend to us? You work with so many, so it's hard.
I know. Yeah. There's a writer that I worked with at the Michener Center, and his name is Nathan Harris, and the book that he wrote for his thesis, where I was his thesis advisor, is called The Sweetness of Water, and it's a historical novel, and it was his thesis, and he's very, like everybody, he's humble, he's insecure, he has no reason to think that he's going to make it in the world. He's just writing his thesis because he wants to graduate, and it became his first published book, and it was a pick for Oprah's book club and Barack Obama's summer reading list.
Oh, cool.
It was a huge success, and no one, least of all Nathan, expected anything like what happened for that book, and it's so well deserved.
That's awesome. Brett, thank you so much.
Thank
you
y'all.
all
Thank
for
you
being
very
here. Thank
much.
you for your time. We have several copies of Brett's work for sale in the bookstore, so if you're interested, please do stop by and pick those up. I think they look like really, really wonderful. Thank you all who were here today, who were here yesterday, who read this book with us. There is a meeting of the Cathedral Reads small groups next weekend, the 23rd at 10 a.m. So if you want to process and reflect all together as one big group, your leaders will send you more information about that. If I saw you at 9, have a wonderful day. If I'm going to see you at 11, I'll be there in a few minutes. Thanks, y'all.